We must start at the source. The day before the attacks in Mumbai, Special Agent Steve Merrill, our legal attaché in the FBI's New Delhi office, was enjoying his first day off in nearly a month. He was on his way to Jaipur, India, to play cricket on the U.S. Embassy team in the Maharaja's annual tournament. And for the record, you do not need to know how to play cricket to work in the FBI's New Delhi office, but it certainly does not hurt. At the moment he learned of the attack, Steve made his way to Mumbai. All he had were the clothes on his back, the BlackBerry, and his cricket gear. He immediately made contact with his Indian counterparts and got to work. No red tape, no turf battles, just first responders working shoulder to shoulder in a time of crisis. For 3 days, Mumbai was a blur of gunshots, explosions, fire, and confusion. And in the midst of that mayhem, Steve helped to rescue Americans trapped inside the Taj Hotel. He set up lines of communication with his FBI and intelligence community counterparts, and he coordinated the arrival of our rapid deployment team. And even before the crisis ended, the investigation had begun. Agents from FBI offices in New Delhi and Islamabad joined forces with the Indian government, the CIA, the State Department, MI6, and New Scotland Yard. And through these partnerships, we had unprecedented access to evidence and intelligence. Agents and analysts conducted more than 60 interviews, including that of the lone surviving attacker, and our forensic specialists pulled fingerprints and DNA from improvised explosive devices. They recovered data from damaged cell phones, in one case by literally wiring a smashed phone back together. At the same time, we collected, analyzed, and disseminated intelligence to our partners at home and abroad, not only to determine how these attacks were planned and by whom, but to ensure that if a second wave of attacks was in the offing, we possessed the intelligence to stop it. Our work in Mumbai was not out of the ordinary. To counter these threats, we must first understand them through intelligence, and once we gain an understanding, our law enforcement authorities allow us to move against individuals and networks. We are not an intelligence service that collects but does not act, nor are we a law enforcement service that acts without knowledge. Today's FBI is a security service, fusing the capability to understand the breadth and scope of the threats with the capability to dismantle those same threats. We understand that we do not operate in isolation. Through our international training programs at the FBI Academy, we are on a first-name basis with thousands of officers around the world, a brotherhood and sisterhood of partners. And in a time of crisis, that familiarity, that friendship, fosters an immediate and effective response. We must continue as an organization to work together with our law enforcement and intelligence partners here and around the world. But we must also work here in the United States with the citizens we serve, work with them to identify and disrupt those who would do us harm. Too often we run up against a wall between law enforcement and a community here in the United States, a wall based often on myth and misperception of the work we do. We know that the best way to tear down that wall is brick by brick, person by person. And yet we understand the reluctance of some communities to sit down at the table with us. And they come from countries where national police forces and security services engender fear and mistrust. Oftentimes, the communities from which we need the most help are those who trust us the least. But it is in these communities that we are and must redouble our efforts. One pattern in particular concerns us. Over the years since September 11th, we have learned of young men from communities in the United States radicalized and recruited here to travel to countries such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, or Somalia. They may be recruited to participate in the fighting or, in the extreme case, to become a suicide bomber. A man from Minneapolis became what we believe to be the first U.S. citizen to carry out a terrorist suicide bombing. The attack occurred last October in northern Somalia, but it appears that this individual was radicalized here in the United States in his hometown in Minnesota. The prospect of young men indoctrinated and radicalized within their own communities and induced to travel to such countries to take up arms and to kill themselves and perhaps many others is a perversion of the immigrant story. The parents of many of these young men risked everything to come to America to provide their children with a brighter, more stable future. And for these parents to leave a war-torn country only to find their children have been convinced to return to that way of life is indeed heartbreaking. And it raises the question of whether these young men will one day come home, and if so, what might they undertake here? These parents are understandably worried about the welfare of their children, and we too are concerned, not only for these families, but for the larger community. Members of the FBI's community outreach teams meet with members of these communities to look at these issues, and together we are making progress, but there remains much work to be done. The simple truth is that we cannot do our jobs without the trust of the American people, and we cannot build that trust without reaching out to say, we in the Bureau are on your side, and we stand ready to help. The world we live in has changed in countless ways. And while change can have negative consequences, it can lead to new discoveries. It can herald new perspectives, new ideas, and new ways of doing business. Yet even in times of great change, certain constants remain. The desire for safety and security, the hope for peace and prosperity, and the need for solidarity against forces that might otherwise divide us. These constants are the same in communities and countries around the world. It is these constants that we in the Bureau strive to protect each and every day. The universe of crime and terrorism will no doubt continue to expand, and we in the FBI will continue in our mission to find what we believe to be out there but cannot always see. We understand that when one of us is at risk, we are all at risk. An attack against one of us is an attack against all of us, and any failure is a collective failure. And only by moving forward together as one community will we make the lasting progress we need to address the threats of today and the threats of tomorrow.